In this video, you will learn about how differently commonly used grid layouts are created and where you can use them. Let's start by examining the grid layout named the Pancake Stack. I've opened extra.html in Visual Studio Code. Now I can start adding the different elements. First is the restaurant's name, Little Lemon, which I put into the header. Then in the main element I type menu, and for the footer I type About Us. After saving, next I will open up extra.css. First I will write the rules for the body, followed by the header, name, and then the footer. First, for the body, I need to use the display property to code the grid. I define its height as 150 VH. 1 VH is equal to 1% of the viewport height. Now I add the grid template rows property that will track the sizing functions for the grid rows. I set it to 1 FR, or 1 fraction, for the main section. Now I define the rules for the header. I start by setting the background color, and follow that up with text alignment, which is centered, and 2 EM padding. 2 EM is a relative height, which is twice the size of the current font height. Let's examine the output. It looks good. I'm going to do the same for the main and the footer elements. I've changed the colors, but everything else is the same. Let's examine the output again. It looks exactly like I was expecting. The header, main, and footer are all formatted in different colors, and if I modify the size of the page, the layout changes accordingly. Next, let's examine the 12-section or 12-column grid system layout, also called a 12-span grid. This type of grid conceptually divides the page into 12 columns of equal size. One can add different elements to the grid by determining their starting point and the number of columns each element spans. Don't worry, this will all become a lot clearer when I go through the following example. I'm opening grid12.html in Visual Studio Code. First, I create a container with class parent, and inside it, I'll add 6 items that I call segments. I add a class name for each of the div tags matching the span or width I'm going to give each of these segments. These widths are randomly assigned. Now I'm going to save and open up my grid12.css file. I'm going to add CSS selectors for each class. I will first add CSS properties for the parent class, and then for the individual segments I defined. For the parent class, I write display grid, and then add the grid template columns property, which I'm going to repeat 12 times with 1 fraction each. Next, I define the properties of the segment. Again, I add display grid, following up with centering the items and the text. Then I set the Grid Template Rows property. I want the segments to be a little wider, so I'll set it to 100 pixels. Let's examine the output. It's not much for now, but let's continue. Now let's set the properties for the different segments. The first one spans 12 columns. I start by adding a light sea green background. And then the next part is important. This is where I use the grid column property. This value tells the element to start from the first column and span all 12 columns. Let's examine the output again. These two segments are now in better shape, starting from the first column and spanning all the way to the 12th. Let's add another selector for 8. Again, I copy the same code, but instead of starting from the first column this time, I'll start from, say, the 5th column, and it'll span across 8 columns. Let's change the color here to bisque. The color now makes it obvious that the element starts from the 5th column and spans 8 columns. Let's add the other segments, and then we'll examine the code again. Alright, let's examine the output again. Now this is looking a lot more presentable. There's also another way to view these columns. Click on More Browser Actions and then on Open DevTools pane. Then you can select the button in the corner to select an element on the page to inspect, then scan over the grid. The page is systematically divided into 12 different columns, and you can configure your code according to your requirements. Grids like these are really useful when it comes to designing something like a magazine, newspaper, or page layout, which can replicate these models. Now you know about the basic grid layout and the 12-column grid.